Tonight, we're very pleased to have with us Patrick Frank. He's the author of the new book, Sharing Code, which is just out from the Museum of New Mexico Press up in Santa Fe. As you all probably know, they do just wonderful and delicious art books. So we're very pleased to be presenting this one, a little bit of art history that definitely has some New Mexico ties. Patrick Frank is from Northern California and now lives in Venice Beach. He taught at universities for some years, and now he's a full-time author with specialties on Latin America. He's also written a book called Posada's Broadsides that you may have heard of before. This book, Sharing Code, is about Art One, which was an innovative computer art program that had some launchings here at the University of New Mexico. Patrick's going to tell us a little bit about the book and show us some images, and I'm sure that we are going to learn a thing or two. So Patrick Frank, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Amanda. Nice to be here. In the course of researching this book, I made a couple of good long trips to Albuquerque, I'm happy to say, and I enjoyed my time there. It was great fun. It was delightful being in Albuquerque doing that research. And as will become clear, Albuquerque features prominently in this book because a lot of the events took place at UNM. The book is just recently published and looks beautiful. I mean, it's by far the most beautiful book I've ever published, and it's the first one I've ever done with the Museum of New Mexico Press. So I'm really thrilled with how it came out as a physical design object, I have to say. The background to this is about an attempt, this book is about an attempt to bring artist and technology together. To create a computer program that would allow an artist who knows nothing about technology to use a sophisticated advanced computer to create art. And so the background to this book really is a phenomenon called the two cultures. In 1959, a British author named C.P. Snow wrote a book called The Two Cultures and the Scientific Revolution. He argued that on the one side, we have the culture of literary and humanism, which is very much avant-garde and very sophisticated and outside the realm of most people's comprehension, things like abstract art and avant-garde novels. And then on the other side, we have highly sophisticated scientific concepts with subatomic particles and nuclear weapons and that kind of thing, so esoteric that they're classified. And so C.P. Snow wrote in this book that these two cultures really have nothing to say to each other, and that's a regrettable circumstance. Our culture is really divided between the technocrats and the literary or humanistic intellectuals, and they have no common meeting ground. So this is a big problem that Snow saw, and the book that he wrote is generally regarded as one of the most influential books about post-war European and American culture. So the debate was widely circulating in those years, in the 50s and well into the 60s. So that's the general background here. And the Art One program, which is the subject of this book, represents an attempt to bring the technology culture and the art culture together to see what might happen. Now, what I want to do here with that as prologue is show some pictures. I'm an art historian, I'm a visual person, I function better with pictures, so let's give this a try. Let's see if I can make this work. Share content, share screen, start broadcast. There we go. Let's pull up my photos. All right, how's that working, Amanda?
Looks good.
Okay, great. The story begins at UNM with Charles Mattox. In the picture there is Charles Mattox. And this is a newspaper clipping from the Albuquerque newspaper of 1970. Charles Mattox came to the University of New Mexico from California. He was a sculptor, and his sculptural work you can see in the foreground of that picture there on the right half of the newspaper clipping. The sculpture that he did was based on mathematical formulas. And he wanted to unite the artist and technology and create UNM as a locus, as a meeting place for artists and technologists. So that was his intent. When he came, he began to look for ways to bring artists and technologists together. And among the people that he found was a electrical engineer named Richard Williams. Richard Williams was on the faculty of UNM, and he was very sophisticated in his understanding of computers, and he wrote computer programs all the time, and he was involved in scientific research relating to the Manhattan Project. Richard Williams was the electrical engineer who wrote the Art1 program with encouragement from Charles Mattox. But Richard Williams also worked on the project of calculating the decay of atomic radiation across time and space. So he was deeply involved in those very esoteric, classified even scientific endeavors. But at the same time, Richard Williams had some artistic proclivities. He was good at drawing, for example, and he had always had a strong interest in art, and especially about pottery and landscape painting and that kind of thing. So he's a likely candidate. He met Charles Mattox, and Charles Mattox said, let's bring art and technology together. Why not? So what they did was they used the main computer that UNM had recently acquired. This is the most cutting edge mass production computer in the middle 1960s. It is the IBM 360. And it was, other than custom built one-of-a-kind machines, this was the most cutting-edge computer that you could buy then, and you couldn't buy it, you could only rent it for $5,000 a month. UNM had one of these, and it did a lot of functions on the university. It calculated the university payroll, and all the scientific departments used it for all their calculations. The scientific and mathematics departments made the most use of this computer. Now, this is a computer card from the University of New Mexico Computing Center. You'll notice, let me go back to the photo of the computer. There's a couple things to notice about this. On the left is the machine that creates the cards. But with that small keyboard there on the left, you can create the computer punch cards. The other thing to notice about the IBM 360 is there is no screen. There is no monitor to this thing. The only way to know what the output is by hitting print. So the University of New Mexico used these cards like every other IBM computer in those times. And in the upper left, you'll see that it says, in the upper left, it says include Art1. That's the first command that you would give that computer to let it know that now it has to use the Art1 program to create a work of art. Now, this is not something that the computer was designed for, obviously. The computer wasn't intended for this. It was intended for math and science and business. The printer that the computer used was a line printer. This is the same machine that they had. It's an IBM 1403 printer. And as you can see, it feeds in from the bottom with tractor holes pulling it along. And the computer would print using letters and numbers and mathematical symbols. That was its output. It couldn't draw lines or make colors or anything like that. It produced letters and numbers and mathematical symbols. So Richard Williams wrote a program so that artists could create on computer paper works of art. So he wrote the Art1 program includes the ability to make lines and circles and ellipses and triangles and mathematical curves. And he wrote a set of instructions, very simple, so that artists could see them and use them. So here's a page from the Art1 instruction manual that artists who wanted to use the program all received. You see here, here's how to make a line using Art1. The bottom part, right where it says columns, is the main thing I want you to pay attention to. Columns 1 and 2, the O2 in the first column calls out the line function, which means the computer is going to draw a line, not a circle, not an ellipse, not a triangle or a math curve, but a line. And then line 3 is the symbol out of which the line will be assembled. You can make a line using any symbol, any letter or number or math symbol. 4 array is array 1 or 2. This means that the printer would print over each sheet twice. It will be 2 passes. Is this line going to be on the first pass through the machine or the second pass through? And then the rest of it is specifying the row and column where the line starts and ends and how long the line is. So all of that is required in order to draw a simple line. That's the most basic thing that you can do on this machine. So Williams created this set of instructions, and you know, I'm of a certain age where when I was in school, we had these blue kind of mimeographs that had a certain smell to them when they were first printed. And that's what this was. It was a blue mimeograph. And he cranked them out and handed them out. It was about 10 pages long so that you could see how to do each of these basic things: line, circle, ellipse, triangle, math curve, etc. So in the spring of 1968, the first artists at UNM began using it. And this is one of the first artworks created using the Art 1 program in 1968 by a fellow named Richard Cook. Wow, look at that. My gosh, boy, what is that? It is a series of overprinted symbols. It's a series of overprinted math symbols with an ampersand thrown in there too. And Richard Cook did this to experiment with the kind of shading that was possible within rectangles and squares. And I talked to him about this. He's still alive. He lives in Albuquerque, by the way. And he at that time had already worked on the Manhattan Project. He worked creating ceramic detonators for nuclear bombs. And he was very skilled at ceramics, assessing the various components of a ceramic so that it would function most efficiently in nuclear explosions. Well, he always wanted to make ceramic art, so he, as an adult, he enrolled in the graduate program in art, and Charles Mattox encouraged him to use his scientific proclivities, bring them together, so he created things like this. Now, in the spring of '68 was the first time that it was unveiled, and this is a typical first work by the first people to use the Art 1 program. Now, one interesting thing about Art 1 is that the program evolved based on the needs and expressed wishes of artists. Artists had input into how the program evolved. When the first group of students went through the program, they got a tutorial and then they got turned loose. So then they came back to Richard Williams and they said, hey, we want some changes. This is fun, but we want some changes. We want a bigger field, and can you get rid of those lines in the paper? Well, yeah, turns out they could. So in the middle of 1968, Richard Williams got the computer center to order paper without lines in it. Wonderful. And he rewrote the program to expand the field and give it more capabilities. Richard Williams himself made some artworks using the Art 1 program. This is a work that he did. You can see the title in the lower right corner maybe. The title is NNZ #1, and there's his signature, 1969. And he's far more mathematically sophisticated than most of the other people who use the program. And you can see that he drew these sine curves and he overlapped them. Richard Williams recently passed away. He unfortunately passed away before the book was published, but I did get to spend a fair amount of time talking with him. And I asked him, I said, what is that? Does that represent a landscape? Because you might think it does, with a lake and some mountains and maybe some sort of a square sun or moon at the top. And he said, oh no, I had no such intention. This is a piece of abstract art. It's repeated curves with certain shadings with a certain balance in it. That's all I was trying to do. And the title is NNZ #1 because you can see, I hope you can anyway, that he used the N character and the Z character, and he also used dots for periods and asterisks to form the shape up in the upper right. Now, a lot of people used Art 1, but the person who took it the furthest by a long shot, the person who used it more than anyone else by a considerable margin, was Frederick Hammersley. Frederick Hammersley is one of New Mexico's best known abstract painters. And he arrived in New Mexico in the fall of 1968 from California. And when he arrived in 1968, he was already a very well-known abstract artist. He was known for helping to create the West Coast hard edge abstract painting style. He and 4 or 5 other artists formed a movement that was called abstract classicism. And he had several shows, not only across the United States, but internationally, of his geometric hard edge abstract art in the 50s and 60s. So he arrived in New Mexico already an established artist with a long track record. And coincidentally, at the time he came to New Mexico, he was kind of in the doldrums artistically. He felt like he had come to a standstill in his painting, and he was kind of out of ideas for the moment. So this hit him at the right moment, at the right time. Charles Mattox, he came to teach on the faculty where Charles Mattox was the chair, and Maddox said to him, gee, why don't you try this computer thing? We got this nice new program, why don't you give that a try? And using the Art 1 program agreed with Hammersley's temperament in a certain way. And he made a couple of hundred artworks using the Art 1 program over a period of more than a year. This was his only creativity. He'd basically given up painting. So this was all he did, was go down to the computer center and make artworks. So, and then he would usually date his artworks to the day, which is a very fascinating phenomenon to a person like me, because I'm an art historian and I care about this sort of thing. And the whole idea for this book came out of this because I saw an exhibition of his works, of his computer works, at the LA Louvre Gallery here in LA. And I noticed they're all dated to the day. And so I sort of said to myself, what would happen if we lined all those artworks up in the order in which he created them? You could see the artist's mind developing as it worked with the program, as it tested the possibilities of the program and found ways of expression on a daily basis as he felt his way around in it. So that's what caused me to write this book, was the fact that there are so many artworks. It's a body of work dated to the day, and Hammersley just exhausted the possibilities. Now, Hammersley's first works with the Art 1 program were trial prints. You can see that this is a trial print. He didn't sign it, he stamped it with his name and address. And you can see the title in the lower right. It says A on 11 symbols. So this is the letter A overprinted with all the various symbols that the printer had in its vocabulary. And he made 26 of these: A on 11 symbols, B on 11 symbols, C on 11 symbols, etc., just to see what the shading possibilities are if you vary the output of the printed page. The papers are all about 8.5 by 14 inches, and that's the field that's available. And he's experimenting with various ways to overlay certain kinds of characters to see how it goes. And he was very exhausted in doing this. Now, he didn't regard these as artworks. He never signed them and never exhibited them, but I think they're kind of fascinating. And I would love to see a show of all 26 of these, for example. It would be a fascinating show of serial art. Now, in early 1969, he began signing and dating his works. And this is a piece called Astigmatism by Degrees. And you can see what he's done here. It's made up of commas and apostrophes. There's a line of commas and apostrophes at the top, a space, and then 2 lines of commas and apostrophes, a space, then 3 lines, then 4, 5, 6, and 7 lines, so that the line gets thicker as you go down. So what's he doing here? he's playing with optical effects. You know how that is when things start to vibrate in your eyeball. When finely detailed things are close together, it can create a sense of vibration in your eyeball. And because the apostrophe and the period are on the same line but occupy different spaces, he noticed that this creates a certain sense of vibration. It doesn't look like it's standing still. This was one of the major effects that Hammersley explored in his work with Art 1, was how to create these optical effects. Now, he signed it, he put the title, he's got the date 1969, and at the far lower, on the lower margin at the right, it says 5/7/69, which is the date he printed this. And then you'll also notice that next to the title, where it says Astigmatism by Degrees, and he has in pencil number 5. And then way out in the right margin, you'll see number 5 circled. Hammersley created after he did several hundred of these works, he separated out a set of 72 that he thought were the most typical of his output with this program. So this is number 5 in the set of 72. So it's very early, and you can see it's kind of unsophisticated. It only uses lines with a certain spacing, and that's it. Now, as he progresses with the program, things get more sophisticated. I'm putting this in as a comparison. This is not by Hammersley. This is by the British artist, Bridgette Riley. Bridgette Riley was a founder of the optical art movement, the op art movement, and I think that Bridgette Riley influenced Hammersley's early work with the Art 1 program. Hammersley knew about Bridgette Riley's work because both artists, both of them were in the same exhibition called The Responsive Eye in 1965. Hammersley was in that show, Bridgette Riley was in that show. The show came to Pasadena when Hammersley was living in Southern California, so Hammersley knew all about optical art, and I think it influenced the way he proceeded when he made these early works from the set of 72. Now, soon he got more sophisticated. This work is titled Jelly Centers, as you can see, and it's number 31 in the set of 72. You can see here that it's made of zeros that form a flattened ellipse. It has periods, it has apostrophes, it has dashes, and each circle is a module or a unit, and the circle is composed of the ellipses are composed of zeros, but they have apostrophes and periods in them, so that the appearance of each circle is not uniform throughout. Half of it is included with a period, and the other half has an apostrophe. So they seem to wobble a little bit, each circle. That's why this piece is called Jelly Centers. And the date is March 2nd, 1969. And as you can see, it's number 31 in the set of 72. Now, this is quite a bit more complicated than the previous sheet. And you can see how he got more sophisticated. This particular print came from the Smithsonian. Hammersley donated all of his works to the Smithsonian, and all of his notes for each work is in the Smithsonian. So I went to Washington, D.C., and I looked at all of that stuff, and you can see how his mind operated. For example, he had to create this work by writing an instruction sheet, and the instruction sheet survives. Jelly Centers, you can see, this is Hammersley's handwriting, and this stipulates one layer of that particular artwork. You can see all the numbers that he had to write to stipulate the locations and the shapes and the characters that make up this work. Everything has to be stipulated down to the nth degree. And Hammersley enjoyed that. He got into it, shall we say. So that sheet, he wrote it all out, and that generated this work. it's a long step, isn't it? It's kind of the opposite of spontaneous creativity, isn't it? It's creativity based on writing a score for later realization. When he wrote those numbers out, it's like writing a musical score that the computer will realize. Looking at that, you wouldn't know what the heck would come out. It requires a computer to understand that and create the resulting artwork. So this is a different kind of creativity from a painting or from a sculpture or from a print. It's really more like music, where you write a score and then the computer realizes the work. The latest works, the last works in this series are very sophisticated. This is number 72 of the set of 72. And gosh, look at that. It is an exercise in sophisticated gradual shading. You'll see as you look, it's divided into columns. There are 5 columns, and each column is shaded from light to dark. And there are 5 steps in the shading based on the overlays that exist. In the lower left, near the signature, it's very light. You go up a little bit, it gets darker and darker and darker and darker as you go up. But the center of each line remains the same. The 2 equal signs go up each vertical column. They stay the same as the surroundings get darker or lighter in each column. So the center of each column is the same, but the exterior of each column changes. Again, it's an exploration of optical effects. And you can see the date of this is December 18th, 1969. So it's kind of late in his dabbling with the Art 1 program. This is also, by the way, the work that they chose for the cover of the book, The Same Change. 1969. What else is going on at UNM in 1969? Well, the Vietnam War protests hit UNM just like they did every place else. 60s style protests hit. But Hammersley had no particular interest. He did not participate in any protests. He professed to be completely apolitical. He didn't express any opinion one way about it or the other. The students wanted him to discuss his feelings about that sort of thing, but he always refused. He said, art is art and politics is politics, and that's what we're about here. That was his position on it. Richard Williams, I asked him about it, and he said he was in sympathy with the anti-Vietnam protests, and he thought the Vietnam War was a stupid war and should not have been fought. Hammersley, in early 1970, Hammersley began to think that he had exhausted the possibilities. He'd taken Art 1 as far as he could, as far as it interested him anyway. And then he began to get certain ideas for painting. So here's a painting from 1970, and I don't remember the name of this, I have to say, but it shows, it's black and white, it uses simple geometric shapes, and it shows the influence, I think, from the computer works that he was already doing. So he began to get back interested in painting again, and so the computer work provided a seedbed for his later painting, and that was basically the end of his work with Art 1. Now, the Art 1 program had a continued life after Hammersley finished using it. And I just want to talk about a couple of artists who used the program after Frederick Hammersley, and even coincidentally with Hammersley. And the other artists who used Art 1, they expanded its capabilities, and they showed a personal style, that they created work that did not resemble Hammersley's in the slightest. Richard Williams himself began to experiment with adding potential to the program in later 1969. His is a work called NNZ number 6. And he's experimenting with how to create a shaded space over a wide span. And so you can see that at the left and right vertical edges, it's pretty dark, and then it gets lighter. It gets lighter as you move from left to right or from right to left. And this was done through a randomization program, and this relates directly to his explorations of how atomic radiation decays across time and space and becomes less strong. One of the other artists who used the program to great effect was Katherine Nash. She went by Katie Nash. She was on the faculty of the University of Minnesota at the time, and she came down to Albuquerque to learn Art 1. Williams decided that he would share the program liberally with anyone who wanted to use it for free. And the way they shared it was by handing over a stack of computer cards. That was the only way to share the program back then, was to hand them a stack of cards along with the instruction manual, and Katie Nash ran with it. She took the program back to Minneapolis to her art department, and she engaged the computer scientists there to create more possibilities for the program, one of which was a polar coordinate program, which creates this daisy shape. You can specify the size and shape of those repeated ellipses in a polar coordinate program. So she's using that, and she's using the randomized shading in the semicircle. In the large circle there, half of it is shaded, as you can see there. So she was a very sophisticated user of Art 1, and look how painterly this is, and how off balance it is, and how shaded it looks. She was a much more expressive artist in her sculptural work. She was primarily a sculptor, and you would never mistake this for a Hammersley work. So she took the Art 1 program to Minneapolis, and several artists on that faculty used the program. And then she also took the program to Britain. There was a group of computer artists in Britain called the Computer Art Society, and they ran with it too. Here is a work created by a woman named Janet Tomlin, and she was a member of the Computer Arts Society, and a computer scientist named Roger Saunders in England took the Art 1 program and added a skew function to it so that you could tilt a rectangle. So you can see what this is rectangles that are tilted. And Janet Tomlin played with that in several really interesting looking works. And I really like this piece, I have to say. It's almost like a piece of Russian suprematist art. And unfortunately, I can't locate Janet Tomlin. If anybody here knows a woman named Janet Tomlin, if anybody who's attending this knows the name Janet Tomlin, I'd love it if you'd let me know, because I tried to get hold of her. I did get hold of Roger Saunders, who wrote the variations on Art 1 that incorporated the new capabilities. And you can also see that in England, they had to use this lined paper, which you sort of have to mentally bracket out. Richard Williams did another thing just as a personal project. And by the way, he was on the faculty, he was on the electrical engineering faculty, and he did all of this work with Art 1 on his own time. The university did not compensate him for it. It was a freely volunteer thing that he did on his own time. He also wrote a program that he didn't give a name to, which drew random lines. This is a random line. You can see the framing of it with those T's and periods in a long rectangle. And in the left portion, you can see an S with a bunch of dashes next to it. That's where the random line starts. And it just wanders and meanders across the field. And then it ends. Maybe you can see in the right portion in the center, there's an F, which means finish, start and finish. So the computer drew that line by random directions that Williams stipulated the parameters within which the line will be drawn, and the computer drew that line. So he just set it loose to draw a bunch of random lines, and then he created some pots. I just love these things. I didn't picture it in the book because I felt like it was a little far afield from Art 1, but he used these random lines to decorate pieces of pottery that he threw. And I have to say, I think this is pretty hilariously fabulous. It's so audacious. It's a pot decorated with a line that a computer generated. And you know, in New Mexico, pottery is a big deal. and pottery is taken as an expression of culture, which of course it is. I dearly love Native American pottery, and I've looked at quite a lot of it. And Williams also collected Native American pottery. So here he has created some New Mexico pottery using symbols, just as the Native Americans used symbols from their culture. Richard Williams used symbols from his culture. And I think, I have to say, I think that this represents the culmination of that effort to get art and science together. Now, this attempt using Art 1 was only one of many such attempts elsewhere in the United States. Between 1967 and 1971, they had the Art and Technology program. This brought artists and technologists together. I'm going to get out of my pictures now. Let's see if I can get out of my pictures and then come back to a, stop sharing, Zoom, and then come back to letting me be on. Am I on now, Amanda?
You sure are. We can see you.
Okay, great. So Art 1 was one effort to bring art and technology together, but around the United States there were other attempts. The Art and Technology program at LACMA let artists go to work in companies that had a scientific bent. There were probably 100 artists involved with that between 1967 and 1971, where artists sort of did internships with companies. And it resulted in about 17 or 18 realized projects. Art 1 has nothing to do. This is another attempt to bring art and technology together. And then another attempt around the same time, starting in 1967, was called Experiments in Art and Technology. Billy Kluver, the engineer in Massachusetts, developed this, and Robert Rauschenberg and John Cage were affiliated with that, if you're familiar with them. So those were other attempts to bring art and technology together. And in those cases, this is where Art 1 is different. In those cases, the artist worked with a technologist kind of collaboratively to create an art object or an art project. The artist would bring ideas, the technologist would bring ideas, and they would work together to realize a piece or an art object. Now, Art 1 is not like that. With Art 1, Richard Williams gave the artist the instructions, and the artist just ran with it. The artists did their thing. And Hammersley and Katie Nash and Roger Saunders and Janet Tomlin, they all knew about these other ways of interacting with technology, but they felt like that Art 1 gave them the ability to be freer within the realm of technology rather than to be limited by what the technologist suggests or controls. The technologist, with Art 1, the technologist relinquishes control and the artist can just go with it and play with it. Now, Art 1 didn't last all that long. It fell out of use by 1972. And this was partly because the fast pace of computer technology overshadowed it. For example, the line printers were rather primitive. Soon plotters came into use, and a plotter will actually draw a line without using some sort of a math symbol. A computer will hold a pen and draw lines. So plotters put Art 1 in the past, and computers got faster and faster, and with the advent of the screen, it became so much easier that it became easier to rewrite a program than to update Art 1. So Art 1 fell out of use, but the idea persisted. To this day, there are programs out there that bring artists and technologists together. The most recent one is called Processing. It was developed by a guy here at UCLA, where the artist gets an instruction manual, and without you knowing anything about technology, they create artworks. That idea still persists, but in a completely different form. And that's pretty much the end of my prepared remarks, shall we say.